Cell membrane, also known as the plasma membrane. Cells are surrounded by a phospholipid bilayer called the cell membrane. What are phospholipids? Phospholipids are large molecules composed of a phosphate group, the polar head, and the nonpolar tails, which are made of fatty acids. The bottom shows a simplified version of it, and this is like the model you see in class with the circle head and the two tails. And then the way that they form the cell membrane is that the tails stick together, and that is because the tails are nonpolar. So we also say that the head is hydrophilic, which means that it loves water, and then the tail is hydrophobic, phobic meaning afraid. It's afraid of water. So here you see the phospholipids sticking together by their tails. Extra means outside of the cell, extracellular, and intracellular means inside of the cell. Their tails stick together because they repel water, and it creates this nice barrier between the inside of the cell and the outside of the cell. There's a lot more to the cell membrane than just the phospholipid bilayer, although that's the main component. Protein channels, carbohydrates, and cholesterol all float within the membrane like pool toys in a pool. You can pause the video now to write down the notes for the cell membrane.
Between the living machinery of the inner cell and the harsh conditions of the outside world stands the cell's plasma membrane. As crucial as this barrier is, it's surprisingly flexible. Push it and watch it move. Poke hard enough and it might break and begin to regroup. The lipid molecules of the membrane naturally assemble in a double layer because their tails repel water as their heads attract it. Throw in some cholesterol and a few carbohydrates, and you have the basic structure of a plasma membrane. Within these lipid molecules, we also find different proteins which do various things for the cell. For instance, they receive signals from the world outside, or they transport nutrients and waste. So nature composes the membrane with a combination or mosaic of different lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins. And these molecules are not stationary. They constantly move within the structure, fluidly changing their positions. The survival of all life rests on this veil of material. A supple membrane, just 2 molecules thick.
Here's another image of the cell membrane. You can kind of have an idea of how complex it really is. The phospholipids make up the membrane, but all the other molecules aid in the structure of the membrane, and as well as what comes in and out of the membrane, which is what we'll talk about next. I also want to make it very clear that the phospholipids are not alive. These are molecules. The proteins aren't alive, the steroids aren't alive, the cell membrane itself is not alive, but it, as well as the DNA and the cytoplasm and everything inside of the cell, is alive.